Hello everyone. For my presentation, I chose to focus on a historical event, disaster preparedness during World War II. Initially, I wanted to do a presentation on the Monuments Men. Contrary to their name, the Monuments Men were a group of men and women who were curators, conservators, archivists, and other museum professionals. They aided the Allied forces in recovering and protecting European art and cultural sites. However, the story of Monuments Men is quite lengthy and convoluted with a large ensemble of characters, and I wasn't confident I could condense it into a 5-minute presentation. Instead, I've opted to look at what is the prologue of the Monuments Men story, the efforts made by museums to prepare for the conflict of World War II, the reasons museums felt the need to prepare, what their concerns were, and the efforts made to address those concerns. The most fundamental concern for museums during wartime is invasion and bombardment. Collections are at most risk of looting and physical destruction. After Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the fear of an invasion on the west coast of America was not an irrational one. And although Germany had not attacked on American soil, the rising tensions in the world and images of the London Blitz produced anxiety over the possibility of an invasion on the East Coast as well. Although the coasts were perceived as the most immediately vulnerable, those in the interior of the United States feared invasion and attack as well. Museums across the country began preparing for war. The protection of art and culturally significant artifacts and sites is a concern during any conflict, but Hitler's particular obsession with art and its acquisition heightened the museum world's fears. As I'm sure you are all aware, Hitler was a failed artist, but his obsession with art did not end when he was rejected from the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna. He was passionate about art his entire life and began collecting in the 1920s. Just as an illustration, during his 1938 visit to Florence, Italy, Hitler spent 3 hours in the Uffizi Gallery. Meanwhile, his host, Benito Mussolini, muttered with vexation, "All these paintings." Hitler's elevation to fear of the German Reich presented an opportunity to establish his own cultural capital of Europe, right in his hometown of Linz, Austria. At the center of his vision was the Fuhrer Museum, filled with the masterpieces of European art. This wasn't a pipe dream for Hitler. He had every intention of seeing his vision through and began preparing before the war even started. Years earlier, German art scholars were sent throughout Europe to create inventories of art pieces and their locations. In 1938, the Nazis began confiscating the personal art collections of German Jews. As Hitler invaded other European countries, his underlings seized more and more pieces of art for his Fuhrer Museum. On December 20th, 1941, museum professionals from across the country gathered at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where Paul Sachs, Associate Director of Harvard's Fogg Art Museum, presented a slideshow featuring images of the drastic measures taken by museums in Europe to protect their cultural sites and artifacts. This moved museum professionals to begin implementing plans to protect their own collections. The most obvious way to prevent the looting or destruction of museum collections is to remove them from their known locations and transport them to secure and secret locations. This is exactly what several museums did. The Museum of Modern Art removed paintings and artifacts from their top floor and moved them to secure sandbagged areas every night. Over 60 tons of Smithsonian collection items were moved to a warehouse near Luray, Virginia, newly equipped to provide a stable environment for the objects. The Art Institute of Chicago moved objects considered to be irreplaceable to an empty bank 40 miles outside of Chicago, where they were protected by 2 guards. In January 1942, the National Gallery moved its most valuable paintings to the Vanderbilt estate of Biltmore in North Carolina. However, other precautions were taken which were not as focused on the collection items themselves. The Art Institute of Chicago provided specialized training for their staff, including first aid and fire safety, while the Smithsonian conducted air raid drills. Fearing some sort of retaliation for the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, closed their Japanese galleries to the public. Facilities such as the Frick and the Smithsonian were outfitted for blackouts. George Stout, director of the Fogg's Department of Conservation and Technical Research and a key figure of the Monuments Men, held seminars at the FOG educating museum professionals on how to handle potential damage caused by bombardment, such as heat damage and exploding windows. Once the threat of invasion began to wane and the tide of war turned in favor of the Allied forces, museums began relaxing these precautions and their objects were returned to their original locations. Although special precautions were taken to protect collection items that were considered the most valuable or irreplaceable, museums were determined to remain open to the public during the length of the war. On that note, I'd like to leave you with a quotation from a resolution proposed by Paul Sachs the day after he spoke to those museum professionals at the Met. If in time of peace, our museums and art galleries are important to the community, in time of war they are doubly valuable. For then, when the petty and the trivial fall away and we are face to face with final and lasting values, we must summon to our defense all our intellectual and spiritual resources. We must guard jealously all we have inherited from a long past, all we are capable of creating in a trying present, and all we are determined to preserve in a foreseeable future. Art is the imperishable and dynamic expression of these aims. It is, and always has been, the visible evidence of the activity of free minds. Therefore, be it resolved that American museums are prepared to do their utmost in the service of the people of this country during the present conflict, that they will continue to keep open their doors to all who seek refreshment of spirit, that they will, with the sustained financial help of their communities, broaden the scope and variety of their work, that they will be sources of inspiration illuminating the past and vivifying the present, that they will fortify the spirit on which victory depends. Thank you for listening. Here are my references, and I'll go ahead and post the discussion questions in my discussion post. Thank you.